Hello and welcome to Literary Notes, a podcast by the Washington Talking Book and Braille Library. I'm your producer, Nathan Ureta. The great Bruce Springsteen once said, "Everything dies, baby, that's a fact. But maybe everything that dies someday comes back." These lines come from the chorus of his song, Atlantic City, and it's what was running through poet Jane Wong's mind as she wrote her memoir, Meet Me Tonight in Atlantic City. In it, she recounts her life on the East Coast as an Asian American growing up in the late 1980s and 90s, and the perspective she has now on her upbringing. She was joined in conversation by library volunteer Amber Wang, who also narrated the book for our catalog. Here's their conversation.
Hey everyone, my name is Amber Wang. I'm a volunteer at the Washington Talking Book and Braille Library in Seattle. And today I'm sitting down with Jane Wong, who is the author of 2 collections of poetry, Overpour and How to Not Be Afraid of Everything. She's an associate professor of creative writing at Western Washington University and has received numerous awards for her writing, including a Pushcart Prize and the James W. Ray Distinguished Artist Award. In 2023, she released her gorgeously written memoir, Meet Me Tonight in Atlantic City, and that's the book that we're here to talk about today. So thank you so much for being here, Jane. I'm so honored to be able to sit down and talk to you today.
Oh my gosh, Amber, I'm so excited to chat with you too. I feel like knowing that you also read and recorded this book, I feel like, I don't know, maybe you're like my doppelganger or something.
Yes.
Like there's maybe 2 Janes afoot right now. So I love it. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, of course. Reading through the book first, I think, was such a wonderful experience because I have so many questions. I'm so curious about the process that you went through to write it. So first, for the listeners who haven't yet read your book or listened to your book, how do you usually describe the memoir when asked?
That's such a great question, especially when this book is like many things to me. But I think the very heart of the book, I would describe it as, like a book of an immigrant, family who is trying to make do with what they have, and to find the love despite a lot of the challenges along the way. It's a fiercely mother-centric book. I am a little obsessed with my mom, so that's part of it. She's at the kind of heart of the book for sure, and my relationship with her. And yeah, it kind of covers a lot of ground of, the Chinese-American immigrant experience. I mean, I think there's no singular story to that, but I really wanted to kind of highlight experiences that are often not talked about. So compulsive gambling addiction, for instance, or going to unlicensed dentists in New York City's Chinatown, and also racialized relationships, romantic relationships. So there is a huge range here. It's definitely a coming of age story, though. It's not linear, so it moves across time, but I guess if I am a character in a book, like I become many different selves. So that's me, I guess, and the book as a whole. I really hope that the book is a lot of multiple feelings at the same time. So heartbreak, you may be crying, but maybe you're laughing at the same time, because I hope the book is also goofy too. So yeah, a mixture of things. But at the core of it, what we can do with very little, like what can we make, what can we dream up, despite not having much at times. Yeah.
Yeah, that definitely came through, like the mix of both how hopeful the book is and how much beauty it finds in the world, but also how heartbreaking it is at different times. And I feel like, it's really hard to distill down into a single theme because it's like a life filled with so many different ideas and thoughts. I was hoping to do a sort of, not a game, but since there's so many different vignettes in the book, I would pick a chapter and then you describe it briefly, the things that you were thinking about as you were writing it, your favorite parts, something like that, if that sounds good to you.
Yeah, that sounds fun.
I had a really hard time picking my favorites out of everything in the book, but I wanted to start with Meet Me Tonight in Atlantic City, which is, I think, the first official or real chapter in the book, and also the title of your book.
Yeah, oh gosh. I mean, Meet Me Tonight in Atlantic City, the first thing that comes to mind is it draws from the Bruce Springsteen song, Atlantic City. And there's a lyric in there where it's like everything that dies someday comes back. And I really am thinking a lot about the ways in which that particular essay, what was on my mind was like the hope of reconciliation with my father, who I'm estranged from. And so for me, that essay, what was on my mind was thinking about kind of problem gambling and looking at research, right, to kind of understand why Asian American communities have a kind of large population of folks who are struggling with compulsive gambling addiction. And, by doing research and understanding why they tend to like target Asian Americans and, immigrants more broadly, and where they pick up in Chinatowns with those free buses and all the goodies you get in order to kind of like go gamble at these casinos, I was able to understand my father and have a bit more empathy for him and clarity around, just like why he did the things he did. Because even though he's a challenging character and person, obviously in real life, I didn't want to create him as like a monster or anything. So that was really the biggest things on my mind, and trying to get my like heart and mind back into that child space of like not knowing what was going on. But it's very sensory, that chapter with like hearing the mahjong tiles on the table, or just like even the brightness of all the casino lights and the kind of like dinging of the machines in the casino. So yeah, that's what I was thinking a lot about. And I did a lot of research. It was really interesting to see the things I found, like the former kind of like, mayor of Atlantic City calling it, it's like Dracula, you can't kill it. And I just was like, I love that. It was very place-based too. So hopefully that answers your question, but those were definitely the things on my mind, like very sensory oriented too and research based. Yeah.
Yes, definitely. I noticed that too, that you mixed a lot of research based, like concrete information with your personal histories, and that made it a lot richer. I also feel like you showed a lot of kindness to your father throughout the book. I think there's another section where you talk about people who are on your hate list or, on your did me wrong list.
Right.
And then you think about adding your father, but then you don't end up putting him on the list. Ultimately.
Yes. Oh, yeah, the kind of revenge list moment, and like wanting to put him on there and always just like never really putting him on there. That there's really a kind of like seed of like, always trying to understand who he is, why he did what he did, like, and the hope and dream that he still, cares about me or thinks of me. That's always going to be something that runs throughout, all these chapters. But yeah, I have a deep fondness for that opening, or title chapter rather. It feels definitely the kind of start of the book, and
Yes.
It was in my writing of this book, it was one of the very first kind of chapters I wrote. Yeah.
I see. Was there a particular thing that drew you to that as your first chapter?
I think mostly I think that chapter begins with like, let's begin here or something. And it's, I go way, way back in time, even thinking about like how the boardwalk existed. And I always kind of wanted to do a kind of play off the idea of like, let's start at the beginning, but it's like a false beginning, it's not actually, I was born, And so I just kind of wanted to play off that idea. But I also wanted to start there and, set the expectations of like, oh, this might be a memoir about, this Chinese American family and how some things kind of fall apart, right? But actually, the book isn't really all about that. It kind of goes much further and much more, in an expansive way through different parts of my life later. And so I also liked to kind of like play with the reader and be like, oh, you think this is just going to be about childhood, but my adult self is also very present. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. Thank you. That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
Okay. Second vignette or second part is A Jane by Any Other Name, which is a chapter that I also really loved, where you kind of talk more about yourself and your personal history.
Ooh, yeah, that particular chapter, like I was really trying to kind of like break down the parts of like who I am and how people see me. I think that's really a big part of that chapter.
I see.
Jane by Any Other Name, like even the title of it is kind of funny, and just like how people envisioned me then, I guess now too, and really that I'm not really any of those versions of what people think I may be. So it was kind of fun to kind of like even think about like, you know, I think a lot of Asian American kind of like narratives or even poems or novels, short stories, always kind of engage this idea of like your name, or like what does it mean to be called, you know, this name. And it's so fraught, right? Especially when, you know, I have this Chinese name that was given to me, but I keep forgetting it. It's like funny. I hope it's funny. And actually when I was recording the audiobook and I had to say my Chinese name, I forgot it again. So I actually had to call my mom in the middle of recording, and she was at work at the USPS, and she had to kind of like say it. I had to record it so I could practice it over and over again.
Yes.
And I forgot it right now. So it's like one of those things where it's like, oh, I wanted to write a chapter that really kind of got at like, okay, like this is what my mom named me in my Chinese name. This is the name that a customer gave me, Jane.
Yes, such a funny story.
Yeah, right? It's such a funny story. But like at the center core of it, like if I could give myself a name or like multiple names, like who am I? Like how do we create our versions of selfhood, separate and or kind of like created by other people, right? Like, of course, we're influenced by all the people and all the experiences we have. But when we kind of like really sit down with ourselves, like, you know, who am I? So that essay was a big kind of like question of like, you know, who am I?
Yeah.
And, you know, that wasn't easy to write, you know, and I'm still evolving, I'm still becoming.
Yeah.
And so I really wanted to write a chapter that was about becoming, and that was really important to me. And yeah, I hope that there's humor in that one too.
Yes. Yeah, that makes sense. I think you are clearly exploring a lot of things in that chapter, and then you end with connecting your name to your mother's name as well, which was really beautiful, I thought.
Yeah. I loved kind of, and you know, this still happens. Our names are so similar. And when I got her like mail accidentally sent to me, it's just like, I really, in some weird way, I've always wanted to become my mother and, you know, to be very vulnerable. Like I've always thought or wanted to be a mother, and it's most likely not going to be possible in my life. And I'm working through my own kind of emotions around that. But I always dreamt of calling my daughter, like if I had one, my mom's name. And so that was always something that was on my mind. And so, you know, my next book, which is poetry, which is still in the works, but kind of imagines that kind of dream daughter of sorts. And I still envision her name being my mother's, you know, in some way. So just thinking a lot about that kind of matrilineal lineage. Again, as I mentioned, at the central heart of this book is my obsession with my mother. She's kind of the main character, even though it should be me. It's not. Yeah.
That leads in perfectly, because the next one I was going to ask you about was wongmom.com, which is a very central theme throughout the entire book. I think there's one titled wongmom.com, but then many more that talk about wongmom.com. If you want to speak to who that character is and how it represents your mom.
Oh my gosh, wongmom.com, which is purposefully kind of like a mouthful to say, was such a risk. I mean, it's kind of bizarre, to be honest, but I wanted to kind of create a speculative or bizarre or just like playful space in the book, because memoir is so focused oftentimes, you even think about the word memory in there in terms of the past. And I really wanted to kind of create this kind of almost like speculative future or some other kind of space. And wongmom.com is a character that I've created. So she's not real. She actually is real, because you can actually go now to wongmom.com and talk to her.
I saw. It was so cute. I loved the website so much. That's WONGMOM.com for anyone who wants to visit.
Yes, you definitely check out wongmom.com. My friend Eric Olson helped make her real, I suppose, on the internet. But yeah, the story behind her was like, you know, my friend was on the bus here in Seattle, and my mom happened to be visiting me, and she was like, "Oh, is that your friend?" And so, she goes and tells him something, and whatever she tells him kind of like has a huge impact on his life. And I don't know what she said, and I don't think I'm supposed to know. But he always said to me, I wish there was a website like wongmom.com where your mom would just give me life advice. And, that's where the character began, is that there's my real mom in the book, and then there's wongmom.com, who is kind of this kind of character that lives, I guess, in like old school, like dial-up internet. And she kind of like gives you kind of life advice, I guess, as I'm writing the book. So it is a very like present even like meta-narrative space in which I call upon her for help when I'm especially writing very vulnerable moments in this book. But I find her hilarious. I think a big part of writing, especially when you're writing about trauma, is that you have to give yourself some grace and yourself some ease and even humor. Like, I don't ever want to feel as if the page is going to hurt me. And so in some ways, like creating her character, despite some of the really challenging parts of writing this book, gave me levity and gave me joy. And I still find her bewildering and just funny, and I needed that so badly as I was writing this book. And she's fun. I mean, I think she's also, a little psychic. Like my real mom declares herself very psychic. So they're very similar, obviously, but one lives in the internet.
Yeah, I see. That makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
I felt like I just loved everything wongmom.com said. I was always so happy when she appeared and dispelled some more advice. But also your real mom. I mean, she's so funny and so present and so alive in the book. I think you just did such a wonderful job of portraying her and all of the struggles that she must have gone through alongside your own.
Yeah, thank you. I think I really wanted this to be my mother's story as well. I remember I was doing a reading once, and some older folks came up to me, and they were like, I think you're too young to write a memoir. And at first, my attitude towards that was like, actually young people experience a lot. And it's about kind of like that experience, right, versus age. Though I also, on the other hand, did tell them and did think, this isn't just my memoir, right? This is my mother's as well. And she has so many different experiences than me. And so it felt almost kind of like we were combining our multiple years together, right, to create this book. And in fact, when, she came to Seattle and she was part of my launch for the book, she started to sign books like with her own name.
Gosh.
And I just thought it was so funny that she was like, oh no, like I'm gonna sign it, and
my book.
Right, my book. And she told me later, she was like, I made you, so I made this book. And so I know she's so ridiculous and iconic in many ways, but the best part is that she said she only could sign like 10 because she had to go because her parking was up. So she was like, I can only do 10. And people were like, please
so
mine.
jealous.
I know.
Holy
people were
moly.
so like, please sign my book. Like, and she signed in Chinese and she wrote, love you, which is so sweet to like everybody. Yeah.
That's so
I know.
sweet.
She should sign
so
my
funny.
copy. Like, she
your
has
bedazzled one.
I know, my bedazzled. I have a beautiful bedazzled copy of this book. Anyway, but yeah, my mom should sign my own book. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, I see. Speaking of telling stories kind of about not only your story, but your mother's story and then histories beyond that as well, I was curious what you were thinking of when you wrote Ghost Archives, which is closer to the end of the book, or it also appears many times.
Yeah. Yeah, it does appear a few times, and I'm trying to remember too, like what I wrote in those sections. So I think maybe I know, right? Maybe I'll just also speak to the concept I have of it, because it's something that's like blossomed into something even bigger coming out from the book, which is like, what do we do when we don't have the traditional sense of the archive. So a lot of people, when they think about the archive, they think about photographs or maybe your uncle wrote something and then that's part of the archive, or newspaper clippings, or, anything like that, or even jewelry or something like tangible like that. Like what happens when you don't really have that? Like it's gone, it's like missing, or it never existed to begin with. And, especially thinking about folks who, come from, marginalized communities, or like from a history in which like a government is trying to suppress you. You don't want a lot of stuff, right?
Yeah.
Because it's like the dangerous part of that. Or if you are, poor and you don't have money to like buy certain things, right? Like for instance, I don't have any baby photos of myself because we couldn't afford a camera. And so does that mean I don't exist? Like, does that mean I'm quote unquote a ghost? And so I think a lot about like what can we actually look for in terms of what we think isn't an archive but actually is. So how do we look at something even closer? Like in many ways, I don't have a lot of the photographs from my childhood, and I don't have any photographs of the restaurant that I grew up in. Only one, because my mom got rid of them. Right. So she also purposely got rid of the archive for a certain emotional reason. So trying to understand, like, what else can we find in terms of the archive? And, sometimes that's just like my gonggongs, my grandfather's, like, sky flakes, cracker crumbs. Like that to me is archival,
Yes.
Yeah.
I see. And also like traditions of food being prepared, passed down, community, things like that.
Yes.
Yeah. As I was reading, it made me think about as well, because my parents are from China, it feels like there's like just a cut there where I don't really know much about my grandparents' lives or my great-grandparents' lives, nothing about it. And it's kind of just a missing piece there. But I think you also talk about having the force of your ancestors behind you. Like you feel like you're calling them into you when you write poetry sometimes.
Yes. Yeah, that's a big part of it. It's like, okay, I love how you kind of describe this like this cut or this like wound or this like emptiness. And then when that exists, like how do you call upon the ancestors to kind of like fill it? And I think poetry, because it's a speculative space or a space that doesn't have to be true with a capital T, but true in the sense of emotional truth. Like I'm allowed then to kind of like feel through their stories, or kind of like feel through what they might want me to fill that cut with, And I do feel like there is a part of me as a poet that feels like almost like I'm channeling some of the things that they're trying to tell me. I feel like a much different self when I'm a poet. Like I almost know something that I don't know as degular Jane. And I think a lot of poets feel this way. When we start writing a poem, we have no idea how it's going to end, because in prose, we generally have an outline, though that can surprise us too. But we write poetry to kind of get at a kind of question, right? That is kind of like bewildering us. And we still might not find an answer, but the endings always like stun me. Like I'm always like, whoa. And that's poet self. Like I don't know what she knows until I write to her. And I think my ancestors are part of that somehow. I do fundamentally believe my ancestors, especially my matrilineal ancestors, were artists or creatives in some sort of past life, because I do feel like I can feel that energy, even though my mom, I don't think she was in the position to become an artist, just due to her, economic backgrounds. Like she couldn't take those risks. And somehow in this generation, in this time, and in this place, I'm somehow able to. And so I do feel, it's hard to explain, but I do feel like I'm holding many voices within me. And maybe that explains why my poet self, it is me and it's also not, Yeah.
That's so beautiful. I think you also have talked about finding your predecessors in books like Dictee by Teresa Kyung-cha, which you talk a lot about in your final chapter, which is Astonished Enough, right? Yeah.
Yeah. That's so funny. I almost forgot the name of it too. I was just like, what is that final chapter about?
Sorry, a little blank there.
I know. I think what's really funny is that what I think a lot of people maybe don't know about the book is that I wrote like 200 pages of it in like 3 months.
Oh my gosh.
I know. And like, yeah, Astonishing Enough was part of that, the blur of those 3 months.
I see.
And in some of those chapters I had been working on for like 5 years. And so it's kind of funny, but like the ones, I feel really proud of the ones I wrote in 3 months, but some people don't know. And sometimes I forget which were the ones that was like that kind of wild.
The
whirlwind of writing that part of the book. Anyhow. But yeah, I have a lot of, I think, poetic influences, or especially other Asian American poets that like stay with me. And Teresa Hakyung Cha is definitely not just a poet, but like an artist who has always like stay with me, mostly because she was always like taking these huge risks. Like she wasn't defining this is a poem, right? Or this is a performance. It was everything. It was just making. And it was an invocation. Like she just was trying to reach a hand out to see who would kind of like touch on the other side. And so I find myself very attuned to her, I guess, poetics, or her way of making. And especially since she, unfortunately, had such a short career because of her like very, very tragic death. Like I do feel this like weird connection with her as kind of a literary sister of sorts. So yeah, and I think it's important to remember that you're not writing into a kind of vacuum where you're not like alone writing. So that includes like all of the kind of like ancestors, right? Like my familial ancestors, but also my literary ancestors too, who have passed. So yeah.
And it's so beautiful. It's deepening and also strengthening and uplifting.
Exactly.
I think you've also called yourself a craft nerd in the past. I'm curious because you talked about kind of being inspired by some of Teresa Hakyung Cha's like images and interdisciplinary arts. Were there any craft decisions in part of making this book that you felt really shaped how it turned out, or that you really love?
Yeah, that's a great question. Yeah, I am a huge crafts nerd. I think all my students would echo that because, and I really want to emphasize that craft is play. I think some people think of craft as something like hyper serious. I don't think of it that way. It's play, but it also does have intention and rigor, but it is at the end of the day play. And so I think thinking about Teresa Hakyung Cha and how interdisciplinary she is, like there is such a kind of spirit of play in her work. Like she was just going to try to address this like one question or this larger theme through multiple ways of making. And sometimes I wish I could talk to her and ask her about her process, or those moments of failure, or process, like a process of delight, moments where she was like, whoa, I really felt something there. And in the making of this book, I really wanted it to feel like you weren't, as the reader, really exactly sure how the next chapter would go. Or I also wanted you to come with me to play in that quote unquote sandbox of like, oh, interesting. Root Canal Street is kind of written in this like style of like a dental like assistant, like yelling out the numbers for like teeth. And, even thinking about the decision to make wongmom.com and those kind of interstitial, I guess, vignettes that consist of her, like that was a craft decision of taking a risk and creating a character. I mean, one of the biggest things that people tell you in nonfiction is like, you have to tell the truth, right? You have to speak to real characters. And wongmom.com is totally made up. And so it's like I was already breaking a rule of nonfiction, right, in that way. And so that was one of the driving like forces behind my craft choices in here, was to really be playful, be like experimental to how I would want to kind of like share my nonlinear approach, which for me actually directly reflects the process of migration. Like there isn't a linear kind of like way we like move through like migration stories, and there's no linear way we heal from trauma. It's all kind of goes backwards, forwards, backwards even more, and forwards, you know. And so I wanted the styling to be like that. But at the same time, like I am a storyteller at heart, and I still wanted it to be coherent and to have a very clear like thread, and that the characters also become clear, kind of multifaceted human beings. And so I wanted the balance of both. Like I wanted like true, like you know, your like uncle or your auntie like telling you that same story over and over again. That storytelling kind of thing, you know, when you're just at like the yum chop table and people are just telling the same story, while also kind of being playful and a little more, I don't know, imaginative, I guess, in the craft. So it was both a fun book to write and a really hard one. You know, like there are days where I just like would be bawling my eyes out, and then days where I'd just be like laughing like on a ball in the like floor, because it was like I was like, oh, I wrote something so ridiculous. So it went through all the emotions, which is also a craft choice, I think, too. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. Well, like adding the braided section, everything that you've talked about, I feel like it made it very fun to read and just so engaging throughout. So I think you made great craft decisions.
Thank you. That makes me so happy, because I'm like, anyone gonna come on this wild ride with me? Like that's how it feels. Like, because I could have written a much more straightforward book, but I didn't want to. It just was not speaking back to like, you know, who am I? Like that's not me. And so I think anyone who knows me knows that I am, you know, many things. And so I really wanted to reach to the kind of reader or the audience who would feel like, okay, I'm coming with you. Let's see what we can do. And I appreciate your attitude towards that, Amber.
Of course. When you talked about having started writing some of the essays for 5 years before you released the book, and then some of them very rapidly. Was there a moment when you realized that you needed to write this prose book or this nonfiction book and started to prioritize that over poetry? Or maybe prioritize isn't the right word. But
Yeah, that's a great question. You know, A Cheat Sheet for Restaurant Babies, which used to be called A Family Business, was the very first quote-unquote essay that I wrote in nonfiction. And then it was Meet Me Tonight, Atlantic City was the second. And that particular essay was actually a very long poem. So it began as that. And when I first read it out loud, it was a much more fragmented kind of like, I guess, autobiography of like my time at the restaurant kind of approach. And I remember the, you know, folks who were at the reading were kind of like, oh, is that an essay? We'd love to see. And I was like, essay? What's an, you know, like I was like, is it an essay? And so I had to write into it. And I realized that whenever I do poetry readings, I always tell like a little mini story right before I read a poem, almost kind of like what inspired me or what's the story behind it.
right.
And I realized like that to me is like an entire book, because like there were so many stories I didn't get to kind of like write in my poems that would need more space, you know? And so like I knew I wanted to write this memoir because I just needed more space for these stories to really like become what they are, right? And that allowed me so much time to kind of like do research or do a lot of like deep reflection, or, you know, connect with some of these larger themes with more precision, I think. Because like even in poems, like I was talking about them, but not in a way that I had to stay with it for much longer. And it is like, it's just literally more pages. And so it's, you have to kind of like go to those hard places even more so. So I knew that it was going to be a memoir, and I knew it was going to take some time too. And so I remember, I think when Tin House took this book, it was only like 90 pages or so, or 100. Oh, so I did actually have to finish the actual rest of the book after it was under contract. And so that really intimidated me, because I had spent so many years making these chapters, right? So precise. And I was like, oh gosh, like how do I, you know, do this in like a year or two, right? And I teach. I'm a full-time professor, and I'm very dedicated to my students. So I only write in the summer. And so that leaves me with 3 months. So that's what happens.
That's where the 3 months
Yes,
comes
that's
from.
exactly what happens. And then I had like maybe 2 more months to revise and copy edit. But the actual writing of the book took those 3 months, and it was a blur. I actually don't remember much of what happened to me. I just was like one word in front of the other, like one foot in front of the other. Like I was just walking on the page and just going. Yeah.
I see. So it grew very naturally out of the poetry, though.
Oh, yeah, it definitely did. And I actually wrote my second book of poems at the same time as this memoir. So they're very paired for me. And I highly recommend working on 2 projects at once, because if you get a little tired of the project you're working on, you can always go to the other one.
Yes.
And so it really helps me. And I'm still doing the same thing right now. I'm working on a poetry project and a fiction project. So I go back and forth. Yeah.
That's so exciting.
Yeah. Yeah.
I see. I'm curious, as someone who also moved from the East Coast to the West Coast, although I think you've been on the West Coast for longer now, how writing about the memories that are so distant physically and also temporally felt, or whether Washington influenced the writing of the book at all.
Yeah, there's actually a lot of us East Coasters out here.
Yeah.
I know.
Transplants.
I know. You're right. There's something about the distance that kind of draws up more from the well in terms of our desire for a kind of imagined version of a place. So it's not exactly nostalgia, but it's a kind of like reimagining of what home is, right? And so in many ways, Jersey in my mind has always been this kind of like amalgamation of all these little memories, and even the kind of like sound of Jersey, like, or the smell of it, right? Like salt on your skin, the kind of like people kind of like yelling across the room to like, say hi to you. Like there is something very different than being out here on the West Coast. But at the same time, this is, Seattle is my home. I've been here since 2011, so it's 15 years. And so, I feel very attached now to this place and almost romanticizing this place, right? Whenever I'm gone from Seattle, which I do, I leave and I travel a lot. So whenever I come back, I'm like, oh my gosh, like my skin feels so much happier because it's so wet here. So I just feel like I need the moisture. And just kind of just like, there's something about the moss and just even kind of just all the dogs. I know that's very specific, but the dogs of Seattle, they're so sweet and cute in their little.
They're everywhere. They're
I
so
know
cute.
they're so cute. Anyway, so I miss Seattle even when I live here too. So they're both big characters in this book, and even though it has a New Jersey title, and a lot of readers in Jersey were like, oh, I thought this whole book would be New Jersey, but there's Seattle in here. I was like, yeah, that's because that's my home too. So I feel like, both those places are so important to me, and both very significant homes. And, my mom's still in Jersey, my brother. So I am always there too. But all of my mom's side of the family lives here in Seattle. So I am, always rooted in these places. And no matter where I go, like this is, my sense of place. But I kind of, create versions of them in my mind, both of them, which, we only do when we love a place, right? Is when we kind of conjure up a kind of imagining of them. I wouldn't do that if it wasn't a place that was so important to me, Yeah.
Yeah, I see. That makes sense.
Yeah.
So both an East Coast and a West Coaster
I think
now.
so. It's true. It's true. It's like 2 halves of me. Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah.
When you were writing the book, did you find anything or uncover anything that surprised you, whether in your family's memories or your memories or the research that you were doing?
Yeah, that's a great question. So many discoveries, I think, that surprised me. And even in the making of the book, the writing of the book, there was surprise. Like, for instance, as I mentioned, I wrote a huge chunk of this book in 3 months. And there was one day where I was like, I don't know if I feel the quote unquote blood moving through like what I'm writing today, meaning fresh blood. Like it's kind of like I just needed like some like fresh blood. And so that sounds so gross, but I called my mom and I was like, tell me a story you haven't told me, because like I keep recycling through the same stories that you tell me, like, and just tell me something that I don't know about you when you were like, let's say 17, 18. And she told me this story. And she was like, oh yeah, I had this guy who was like really into me, and he used to like bring me like hot bread, and he would always give me these like free tickets to like a movie theater nearby. He really wanted to like date me, marry me, and it's like my father really hated him. And and she told me this story, and I was just like, oh, it's so funny that like my mom remembered this, and she remembered it wasn't just about the memory that I was like discovering. I was discovering how my mom was remembering that, and the delight in her voice, and the kind of like giddiness of being like a young woman, right? And she was just like, isn't that so funny? He like stalked me and like followed me. I was like, it's not funny. It's actually really creepy. And she was like, oh yeah, I guess it is a little creepy. And I was just like, yeah. And she was like, wait a second. Yeah, I don't think I like that guy now. And I'm like, well, okay. And so it was just funny to see her kind of like process her own memory. And so I, tell my students this all the time, but it's like sometimes it's not about the memory. It's about how you recall the memory. And I think watching my mom kind of like go through her own remembering of that and questioning her remembering of it and creating like a new narrative after speaking to me about being like, actually, yeah, why didn't he go away? Like my mom's attitude changed. And so little discoveries like that, which, you write into this idea of like what could have been, right? And I think that's when I used that story, or at least the idea of that story was like, what could have been, right? If my mom had dated him instead of my dad, or the other guy who had a crush on her, like what could have lives been like?
Yeah.
And so I discovered my mom's own her own kind of fantasy world in her mind, like what could have been. And it was only because she told me that story, and I heard it in her voice, like, oh, like, things did happen the way they did, but it's interesting how she holds on to certain moments that could have changed everything,
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's interesting to see like what the formative moments people remember are.
Yes,
throughout their
exactly.
lives. Yeah.
Exactly. And she totally said she hadn't thought about that in so many decades. So it's kind of funny for her to draw that up immediately.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But that's beautiful that the process of you writing this book, brought that memory back up for her and allowed her to share it with you and brought things back into the light for both of you.
Totally. Exactly.
Do you feel like after having released the book now, and if your family's read it, or I think you said that your mom could listen to it as the audiobook, did that open up new conversations as well?
Yeah, it did. It was a kind of really intense moment of realizing that once you finish a book, like the book keeps living, or like, the life you have doesn't end as the book ends, right? My life continues. My being in the middle of a kind of heartbreak moment continues, right, into whatever happens years after this book, and what it means to kind of like be in love now, like, and being in a healthy relationship now after so many very abusive relationships in this book. And so, it's kind of weird to think about it. It's like a little, I guess, time capsule for me. And, it's been almost 3 years since this book came out, which is shocking to me because I don't know where the time went. But so much has happened since the book was released. And one of the biggest things that happened was, my father, who I am estranged from, I found out that he had a stroke. And so I had this moment where I had to decide, like, do I go see him after all these years, after writing this whole book, right? And it was because I wrote the book that allowed me to go see him. If I didn't write this book, I don't think I would have the courage or bravery or empathy, really, to see him. This book gave me so much empathy for my father, despite how there are moments where I don't want to have empathy for him, especially as a husband to my mother. And so that was really powerful for me. And I realized that the book, just like, the ancestors are telling me something, right? Like making me realize that I do have the, the emotional capacity to see my father again after such a long time of not seeing him. I barely recognized him, and he thought I actually was my mother.
Wow.
Yes, I was around the same age when they divorced, and so he was having this weird time warp kind of moment, especially since I had the same haircut as her then too. It's just like a very strange moment for him, and it was very emotional, that we did not talk, and he couldn't talk as well. But yeah, so much happens after the book, and I think the biggest thing too is like having people read this book, and then especially Asian American, readers in particular will come up to me and share some really kind of emotional experiences themselves of things they identified with. And to me, that adds to my also realizing that the book is also beyond me too.
Yeah.
And, that it creates a life of its own. And so I'm very honored to be able to kind of like hold that. And yeah, it is a book I'm really proud of, though one that took a lot out of me. And so like people have asked me too, it's like, will you write another memoir? Will you write nonfiction again? I was like, I won't say no, but I will tell you for now, a very, very long break. It was hard. So yeah.
I see. I think you've also said that writing nonfiction and like writing the memoir was more vulnerable for you.
Yes.
Compared to your poetry, right?
Yeah, much more vulnerable. My editor, who's amazing, Elizabeth DeMio, was someone who really pushed me to stay in my kind of moments of reflection. And she always made me stay there longer than I was even comfortable with, which I really appreciate, because like my poet self wants to just simply have the image there or end the scene. And she was always trying to push me to kind of like reflect with more, with more knowledge, like as if I knew something again that I already knew, right? It was just about getting it out. So it was very vulnerable. And I will also say too, one of the biggest decisions all nonfiction writers have is exactly that. How vulnerable do you want to be? Right? Because you can always take it out, right? You can always kind of like decide at the last minute, actually, I don't want the world to know that, right?
Yeah.
And there were moments in this book where I also took out things I didn't want the reader to know, but I kept a lot in because I realized like, oh, if I do share something, somebody out there, whoever it may be, I may never meet them, might feel seen in that moment. And so especially being, someone who's survived quite a bit of like intimate partner violence, like I really wanted to finally say something about it. I had never written about it before in my poetry, at least not directly or with such bluntness. And so it felt really important for me to kind of do that now in this book. And it was a very vulnerable thing because I think a lot of my close friends knew about what was going on with me, but some of my like acquaintances or people who aren't as close with me didn't know what was happening. Yeah. And so when they read the book, it's almost as if they wanted to go back in time and like hug me then, and they've said that to me. And I was like, oh, yeah, why didn't I tell more people? Like I could have, but it's because I wasn't ready and I wasn't, now's the time I can be vulnerable. And healing is going to be a continual process, but I feel proud of myself for being vulnerable because that only allows more people to be vulnerable with me. Yeah.
Yeah. It's really beautiful how you turn your personal experience, I think, and you do this with so many different topics as well, from the gambling to like your mom's work in the postal service, and then also anti-Asian fetishization and violence and all of that. How do you think about your role in speaking about wider histories of injustice as a poet and as a writer?
Yeah, I think it's central to everything I do. I mean, I think that, I mentioned at the start of our conversation of like what it means to find love amidst all of this. And I think that that's part of what it means to speak out, right? Is like recognizing that there's more to this, right, than just pure survival, right? There's a future, a possibility of thriving. There is a possibility of community connection. And in sharing these stories, in being very clear, right, about kind of these instances of racism or, very kind of racialized sexism, right? Like over fetishization of Asian women. Like I wanted to share all that so that it wasn't something that we didn't feel shame talking about. And the same thing goes with like, just kind of my father's, problem gambling. Like I didn't want people to feel ashamed about it. Instead, like if my father could have sought help, right? If there was an intervention points, right? Or points, our lives could have been very different. And so I think about this a lot. Like a lot of the kind of book and way I write is about kind of awareness and about trying to say the things that we don't want to say and seeing the kind of like loud repercussions of that, like rightfully so. Like I think so much of this book is also a lot of rage, but a lot of tenderness and possibility. So to kind of declare things like that, was not okay. That should not happen, while also being like, but I got you, right? And looking at the people in this book, my friends, my mother, like who were there with me the whole time. And so drawing upon your community. So for me, it is important, I think, and necessary as a writer to speak out. And if anything, it's like it is inherently within me to be political. And so to me, that's important. I can't divorce that from any part of myself. And so, and I don't know if some readers are maybe like coming to this book and thinking, memoir, that it might be something a little more kind of like soft or something. But, it's like this is a hard-boiled egg too, And so I don't know. There's parts of it that I really wanted to have readers like even when I said like, are you with me? Like come with me. Yeah. You also have to have the the understanding that like, I'm mad with you, Jane, or I'm like, oh, I'm like grieving this too, right? And so I wanted people to feel like they could do that in their own communities too, or share their own stories, or be vulnerable, or demand more than the world we live in, and what could be. So it's very central to me as a writer, but also as an educator. So,
Yeah. Thank you for that. It was really beautiful to be able to see you express so many emotions when oftentimes I think Asian women are expected to sort of be more quiet and demure. And it's like the killjoy feminist who will speak up about these things and stuff like that. So.
Yeah, I think that, just like you said, was the driving force behind like why I wrote this book the way I did, was that I think the expectation of this being like a soft, like, Asian American, like woman memoir about like childhood, like a rough childhood, and not having my realized adult selves in here troubled me, right? That that's what the industry might expect of us. And I really wanted to write this book. When somebody asked me, my publisher, who's your ideal audience? I was just like, the like weirdo, angry Asian American girls out there, I really wanted that kind of like solidarity and an understanding, right? That sense of like, okay, like we're here together against all these like, very problematic like stereotypes of how we're supposed to be, and to be quiet or cute or any of this kind of stuff. Like I didn't want anyone to mistake this book for that. And it's pretty blunt in some ways. Yes.
Yeah, well, I think it is unmistakable.
Good. I was just like, I know on like Goodreads when I do get, and I have to say I had incredible, really kind reviews. I love reading my Goodreads reviews because I think they're so telling and funny, and it's almost like an essay within itself to kind of see. And I've had so many wonderful readers share their thoughts and feelings about the book. But then I always get these like 1-star reviews where it's just kind of like, readers who are just like, I hated this book because it was like, she's so angry and da-da-da. I was like, correct. I was like, you got it. So
Exactly
actually
right.
your 1-star review is actually a 5-star. Thank you. You got it. So in some ways I laugh at those moments because I was just like, yeah, this isn't for you,
Yeah.
Great. I did my job.
I see.
Yeah.
Well, for all those weirdo, angry people out there who might be reading or listening to the book, is there any one thing that you kind of hope people take away from the book?
Yeah.
If you could just sum it down.
Yeah, I think that, weirdo, angry, but also tender-hearted, I would add that too, because I think the biggest takeaway from this book is exactly that latter phrase, or just kind of like what it means to be tender-hearted or like create possibility, despite, the kind of rage one feels. To be enraged in community is to not be lonely. And I think that there's so much like, I don't know, like hope and resilience in this book that surprised me even as I was writing it. And so I hope that this book is also like a salve or like a balm to the heart too, because I think that at the end of the day, at the end of the book, we end with sweetness and we end with like mangoes and like at the end of every meal. I just remember even like growing up, like even if there wasn't a ton of food, right? Or like we didn't have like a meat dish that day, like there was always a slice of orange at the end, always a little sweetness. And I think that to me is how I think about this book ultimately, is it's a message of that sweetness and that tenderheartedness despite it all. Again, love is at the central core of this book, and making do with what you have is a kind of act of love. And so yeah, I hope readers read this book and feel through all the emotions, but still ends with sweetness. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, thank you for bringing us such a beautiful and complex book. And thank you so much for talking to me today.
Oh, it's such a joy. I feel like I could talk to you for a very long time. So
gosh,
just
me
thank you
too.
for your insightful reading of the book and just your own kind of, I hope that it touched you in some ways, and I'm excited for our continued conversation too.
Yeah.
So thank you, Amber.
Of course. Thanks, Jen.
Yeah.
Meet Me Tonight in Atlantic City is currently in process as an audiobook for the collection of the Washington Talking Book and Braille Library. It'll have the class ID DBC 31152. We'll let you know in a later episode when it's available for download. If you have any questions or comments about the library, or to see if you qualify for our services, visit WTBBL.org or leave us a voicemail at 206-615-0400 or toll free at 800-542-0866. This episode of Literary Notes is a production of the Washington Talking Book and Braille Library based in Seattle, Washington. I'm your producer, Nathan Ureta. Thanks for listening.